The sunset painted the horizon with streaks of fiery orange and scarlet as Madeline Cooper stood frozen at the window of her father's ranch house, staring at the ominous cloud of dust approaching from the south. Her wedding day had arrived, but it wasn't joy making her heart pound against her ribs, it was dread. In less than an hour, she would be married to Harold Pemberthy, the banker's son with cold eyes and colder hands, a man her father had chosen for his money and influence rather than any concern for his daughter's happiness. Montana Territory, 1875, was no place for a woman without protection. Her father had reminded her countless times. Since her mother's passing 3 winters ago, Madeline had managed the household while her father's health slowly deteriorated along with their ranch's finances. Now, at 22, she was to be the solution to their monetary troubles, the sacrificial lamb to save what remained of the Cooper legacy. She touched the simple white dress hanging on the wardrobe, the fabric soft beneath her trembling fingers. The guests would be arriving soon, filtering into their modest home for the ceremony. Her father had insisted on proceeding despite her tearful protests, and Madeline had eventually relented, knowing there were few choices for a woman in the frontier. Miss Cooper. The voice startled her from her thoughts. Standing in the doorway was Sarah, their neighbor's daughter who had come to help her prepare for the ceremony. "Your father says the first guests are arriving. We should get you ready." Madeline nodded, resigned to her fate. As Sarah helped her into the wedding dress, she stared at her reflection in the small mirror propped against the wall. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly at her nape, her green eyes dull with unspoken sorrow. She barely recognized herself. The sound of horses and wagons grew louder as more guests arrived. From her bedroom window, Madeline could see them families from town, her father's business associates and Harold's family, dressed in their finest clothes. But her attention was drawn to a lone rider approaching from the east, someone who wasn't part of the planned procession. The stranger rode a magnificent chestnut stallion, his posture straight and confident in the saddle. Even from a distance, something about him seemed familiar, stirring a memory she couldn't quite place. "Who is that?" Madeline asked, pointing toward the window. Sarah squinted. "I don't know, not from around here, I reckon." A knock at the bedroom door interrupted them. Her father's voice, rough with age and illness, called out, "Maddie, Harold and his family are here, it's time." "Just a moment, father," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil within. When the door closed, Madeline turned to Sarah with desperate eyes. "I need a minute alone, please." Sarah hesitated but nodded, slipping from the room with a sympathetic glance. The moment the door closed, Madeline rushed to the window again. The mysterious rider had dismounted and was speaking with one of the ranch hands. Something about his tall frame and the way he stood with one hip slightly cocked stirred a distant memory. The sound of footsteps in the hallway sent panic through her. In a split-second decision, Madeline darted behind the long curtains that framed her bedroom window, pressing herself against the glass as the door opened again. "Madeline?" It wasn't her father's voice this time, but deeper, with a hint of a drawl she hadn't heard in years. Her breath caught in her throat as the floorboards creaked under heavy boots. She remained perfectly still, heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give her away. "I know you're in here, Maddie," the voice continued, closer now. "Mrs. Wilson at the general store told me about the wedding, said your father had finally found you a suitable match." The way he said those last words, dripping with disdain, confirmed her suspicions. The curtain was suddenly pulled back, revealing a face she'd thought she'd never see again. Blake Yancy stood before her, his blue eyes as piercing as the day he'd ridden away 5 years ago. He was broader now, his face weathered by sun and wind, a thin scar running along his jawline that hadn't been there before. But the crooked smile that had once made her young heart flutter remained unchanged. "Blake," she whispered, unable to believe he was really standing before her. His expression softened as he took in her wedding dress, his gaze lingering on the tears she hadn't realized were streaming down her cheeks. Without a word, he reached forward, gently brushing them away with his thumb. "Hiding behind curtains," he murmured. "Just like when we were kids, and your father caught us stealing cookies from the kitchen." Before she could respond, he stepped forward, one hand cupping her cheek as he leaned in and kissed her. The touch of his lips against hers sent a shock through her system, awakening feelings she'd buried long ago. For a moment, she was 18 again, sneaking moments with the ranch hand her father had forbidden her to see. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark with determination. "I didn't ride 300 miles to watch you marry someone else, Maddie. What are you doing here, Blake?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came back for you, like I promised I would." He took her hands in his. "I've got land now, Maddie. A place of my own up in Wyoming territory. It's good land with plenty of water and grass for cattle." The memory of his promise rushed back to her whispered words on their last night together, when he'd vowed to make something of himself and return for her. She'd waited 2 years before her father had convinced her Blake was never coming back, that he'd forgotten her like so many drifters forgot their promises. "It's been 5 years," she said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. Blake's grip on her hands tightened. "I know. And I'll spend the next 50 making it up to you if you'll let me. But right now, we need to leave." Before the bedroom door swung open, revealing her father's stern face. Thomas Cooper had aged significantly in the past few years, his once imposing frame now stooped with illness, but his eyes still flashed with the same fierce protection or control they always had. "What in God's name is going on here?" he demanded, his gaze shifting from Madeline to Blake with growing anger. "Yancy, how dare you show your face here, Mr. Cooper?" Blake acknowledged with a slight nod, though he didn't release Madeline's hands. "I've come to speak with your daughter." "There's nothing to speak about," Thomas snapped. "Madeline is getting married today to a respectable man who can provide for her." "Father, please," Madeline began, but was cut off by another voice joining the tense scene. Harold Pemberthy appeared behind her father, his thin face twisted in confusion as he took in the scene before him. "What's happening here? Who is this man?" His eyes narrowed as they settled on Blake's hands holding hers. Blake straightened to his full height, a good 4 inches taller than Harold. "Blake Yancy, I'm here to stop this wedding." The silence that followed his declaration was deafening. Madeline could feel the tension crackling in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. She looked from Blake to her father to Harold, realizing that this moment would define the rest of her life. "This is absurd," Harold finally spoke, his voice tight with indignation. "Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but Madeline and I are to be wed within the hour." "The minister is already downstairs." "Madeline isn't marrying anyone today," Blake responded evenly. "Not unless it's me." Thomas Cooper's face reddened with fury. "You have some nerve, boy, coming back after all these years, thinking you can just walk in and claim my daughter. Where were you when we were struggling to keep this ranch, when Madeline's mother died, when we needed help?" "I was building something worthy of her," Blake answered, his voice low but firm. "You told me I wasn't good enough, that I needed to prove myself before I could court your daughter." "Well, I've done that now." "It doesn't matter what you've done," Thomas insisted. "Arrangements have been made, contracts signed." Blake turned to Madeline, his eyes searching hers. "It's your choice, Maddie. It's always been your choice. What do you want?" The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Madeline felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders, her father's desperate need for financial security, Harold's cold entitlement, and Blake's passionate hope. For years, she'd done what was expected of her, putting her own desires aside for the good of her family. But standing there in a wedding dress meant for a marriage without love, she finally found her voice. "I can't marry you, Harold," she said softly, turning to her would-be groom. "I'm sorry for the embarrassment this will cause, but it would be crueler to go through with a wedding when my heart belongs to someone else." Harold's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. Your father and I have an agreement." "An agreement that didn't include my consent," Madeline replied, her voice growing stronger. "I've spent my life trying to be the dutiful daughter, but I won't sacrifice my happiness for a business arrangement." Thomas Cooper stepped forward, his face ashen. "Madeline, think about what you're saying. Think about the ranch, about our future." "I have thought about it," she said, turning to her father with tears in her eyes. "I've thought about little else for years. But forcing me to marry a man I don't love won't bring Mother back, and it won't make either of us happy." The mention of her mother seemed to hit Thomas like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, his hand reaching out to steady himself against the doorframe. Blake moved then, placing himself protectively beside Madeline. "Mr. Cooper, I understand your concerns. I know you want security for your daughter and to preserve what you've built here. But I can offer Madeline a good life now. I have land, cattle, and a home that's waiting for her. It's not as grand as what Mr. Pemberthy might provide, but it comes with something his offer doesn't love." Harold scoffed, adjusting his waistcoat with indignant fingers. "Love doesn't pay debts, Mr. Yancy. Thomas owes the bank a considerable sum." A sum that would have been forgiven upon our marriage. Understanding dawned on Madeline's face. "Is that true, Father? Is that why you were so insistent on this match?" Thomas Cooper's shoulders slumped in defeat. "The ranch is mortgaged to the hilt, Maddie." Harold's father agreed to clear the debt as part of the marriage arrangement. "So I was to be sold to clear a debt," Madeline said quietly, the hurt evident in her voice. "No," Thomas protested, though weakly. "I wanted to secure your future, to make sure you were taken care of after I'm gone." Blake's jaw tightened. "How much is the debt, Mr. Cooper?" $5,000, Harold answered before Thomas could, a smug smile playing at his lips. "A sum I doubt a cowboy could produce, no matter how much land he claims to have." Blake's expression didn't change. "I can pay it." The declaration stunned everyone in the room. Thomas Cooper's eyes widened in disbelief, Harold's face flushed with anger, and Madeline turned to Blake with a questioning gaze. "I told you, Maddie. I've been working for us," Blake explained, his eyes never leaving hers. "Cattle driving, gold prospecting in California, and finally, my own ranch. I've saved every penny." "You expect us to believe that a ranch hand amassed that kind of fortune?" Harold sneered. "Believe what you want," Blake replied evenly. "But I'll have the money transferred to the bank by the end of the week. Mr. Cooper's debt will be cleared, and Madeline will be free to make her own choice." Thomas Cooper studied the young man before him, seeing for the first time not the penniless ranch hand who had courted his daughter in secret, but a man who had made his own way in the world. "And if she chooses you?" "Then I'll take her to Wyoming, to the home I've built for her," Blake answered. "But the choice is hers. It's always been hers." Madeline looked between the three men, a sense of clarity washing over her. For years, decisions had been made for her, her life plotted out by others. But standing there in her wedding dress, she finally saw a path forward that was entirely her own choosing. "I choose Blake," she said firmly, moving to stand beside him. "I've always chosen Blake." Harold's face contorted with fury. "This is absurd. Father will never agree to forgive the debt." "You'll both be ruined." "Then we'll be ruined together," Madeline replied, her hand finding Blake's. The tension in the room was broken by a commotion from downstairs, the sound of guests murmuring in confusion, wondering about the delay. Thomas Cooper glanced toward the door, then back at his daughter, conflict evident in his tired eyes. "The guests are waiting," he said quietly. "What do you propose we do now?" Blake squeezed Madeline's hand. "There's a minister downstairs, isn't there? And a bride and groom who want to be married." He looked at Madeline questioningly. "If you're sure, Maddie," she nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. "I'm sure." Thomas Cooper looked between them, years of bitterness and disappointment warring with the love he felt for his only child. Finally, he sighed, the fight leaving him. "Harold, I believe you and your father should leave. It seems there's been a change in plans." Harold Pemberthy's face reddened further. "You'll regret this, all of you. My father will foreclose on this ranch within the month." No, he won't, Blake stated confidently. Because I'll pay the debt, as I said, fair and square. Harold stormed out, nearly knocking over Sarah, who had been hovering anxiously in the hallway. Thomas Cooper watched him go, then turned back to his daughter and Blake. "You're really willing to pay off my debt?" he asked Blake, disbelief still evident in his voice. "Yes, sir. Not for you, with all due respect, but for Madeline. She loves this place and I won't see it taken from her family." Thomas Cooper nodded slowly, a grudging respect forming for the man before him. "Then I suppose we have a wedding to attend, though not the one our guests are expecting." Madeline's heart soared as she realized what her father was saying. She rushed forward, embracing him tightly. "Thank you, Father, thank you for understanding." He held her briefly, then pulled back to look at her face. "I only ever wanted your happiness, Maddie, I just didn't think." He trailed off, glancing at Blake. "I didn't think it would look like this." "Sometimes happiness comes in unexpected packages," she replied softly. Thomas Cooper straightened his shoulders, the action seeming to require great effort. "Well then, I suppose I should go downstairs and explain to our guests that there's been a slight change in the groom." As he left the room, Madeline turned to Blake, barely able to contain the joy bubbling within her. "I can't believe you're really here, that this is happening." Blake pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I promised I'd come back for you, Maddie. I'm sorry it took so long." "You're here now, that's what matters." She reached up, tracing the scar along his jawline. "You'll have to tell me how you got this." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "We'll have a lifetime for stories. Right now, I think we have a wedding to attend, our wedding." The words sent a thrill through her. "Our wedding," she repeated, smiling. Downstairs, the guests received the news of the change in groom with varying degrees of surprise and confusion. Some of the older members of the community remembered Blake from his days working on the Cooper Ranch and whispered among themselves about the scandalous turn of events. Harold's family had departed in a fury, but the rest of the guests remained, too intrigued by the drama to leave. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Madeline stood before the minister in her white dress, her hand clasped tightly in Blake's as they exchanged vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Blake pulled her into a kiss that promised a future filled with the love and passion she had always dreamed of. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, with food and drink that had been prepared for a different wedding but served the same purpose. As evening fell, lanterns were lit around the ranch house, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Madeline found herself standing on the porch, watching as Blake charmed her father's friends with tales of his adventures in the West. The years of hardship and loneliness seemed to melt away as she observed the easy confidence with which he moved through the crowd, his eyes frequently seeking hers across the room, as if to reassure himself that she was real, that this moment was real. Thomas Cooper joined her on the porch, leaning heavily on his cane. "He's different than I remember," he admitted, nodding toward Blake. "Grown up. We both have," Madeline replied. "We're not the same people we were 5 years ago." Her father nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I was wrong about him, Maddie. I thought he was just another drifter who would break your heart. I didn't see what you saw in him. And now I see a man who kept his promise against all odds." He paused, his weathered hand covering hers on the porch railing. "Your mother would have liked him, I think. She always said you had good judgment." The mention of her mother brought tears to Madeline's eyes. "I wish she could have been here today." "She is, in her own way," Thomas said softly, patting her hand before straightening up. "I should go back inside." "Don't stay out here too long, it's your wedding day after all." As her father returned to the party, Blake appeared in the doorway, his eyes finding hers immediately. He crossed to her, his steps sure and confident, and leaned against the railing beside her. "Everything all right?" he asked, studying her face in the lantern light. "Better than all right," she assured him, leaning into his warmth. "Father was just saying he thinks my mother would have approved of you." Blake's expression softened. "I remember her. She always gave me extra helpings at dinner, said I was too skinny." Madeline laughed, the sound light and free. She did that with everyone she liked. It was her way of showing affection. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. "So," Madeline finally said, turning to face him fully, "tell me about this ranch in Wyoming." Blake's face lit up with enthusiasm. "It's in the Bighorn Basin near a town called Cody. Still small, but growing. The land is green and rich, with mountains on the horizon that turn purple at sunset. The house isn't much yet, just 4 rooms, but there's plenty of space to expand." "It sounds beautiful," she murmured, trying to picture it. "It is, but it's been missing something important." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "It's been missing you." "Well, you won't have to miss me anymore," she replied, reaching up to kiss him softly. The sound of approaching footsteps caused them to part, turning to find Sarah standing in the doorway, her young face alight with excitement. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, not looking sorry at all, "but your father's about to make a toast, Mrs. Yancy." The new name sent a pleasant shock through Madeline. Mrs. Yancy. It sounded right, like a name she had been meant to wear all along. Blake offered his arm with a smile. "Shall we, Mrs. Yancy?" She took it, feeling the solid strength of him beside her. "We shall, Mr. Yancy." The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Blake arranged for the transfer of funds to settle Thomas Cooper's debt with the bank, much to the chagrin of Harold Pemberthy's father, who had been counting on foreclosing on the Cooper ranch. The town buzzed with gossip about the dramatic wedding day events, but Madeline found she cared little for the whispers and stares. Her happiness was too complete to be dimmed by others' judgments. They had decided to stay at the Cooper ranch for a few weeks, to help her father put things in order before they departed for Wyoming. Blake threw himself into the work with enthusiasm, repairing fences that had gone neglected, mending the roof that had leaked all winter, and working with the remaining ranch hands to ensure Thomas would be able to manage once they left. Madeline watched the growing respect between her husband and father with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The 2 most important men in her life, once so at odds, now finding common ground in their love for her and the land. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Thomas Cooper cleared his throat awkwardly, drawing their attention. "I've been thinking," he began, his fingers tapping nervously on the arm of his chair. "This ranch is too much for me now, even with the debt cleared. I was wondering if you might consider—" He paused, looking between them, "if you might consider taking me with you to Wyoming." Madeline exchanged a surprised glance with Blake before turning back to her father. "You want to leave the ranch, but it's been in our family for 3 generations. Thomas nodded, his expression resigned but determined. "And it will still be in the family. I've spoken with your cousin Edward in Kansas. He's willing to buy it, keep it in the Cooper name. He's young, has sons of his own. They can make something of it again." "And you're sure that's what you want?" Madeline asked, still struggling to believe her father would willingly leave the only home he'd ever known. "I'm sure I want to see my grandchildren someday," he replied, a small smile playing at his lips. "Hard to do that from 1,000 miles away." Blake leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "There's plenty of room at our place, Mr. Cooper, or we could build you a small house nearby, whatever you prefer." Thomas Cooper's eyes misted slightly at the offer. "I'd like that. A fresh start for all of us." As the plans for their departure took shape, Madeline found moments of quiet reflection amid the busyness. One afternoon, while sorting through her belongings to decide what to take to Wyoming, she came across a faded ribbon tucked inside an old book, a token Blake had given her on their last night together before he left. "I remember that." His voice came from the doorway, startling her from her reverie. "You wore it in your hair the night of the harvest dance." She smiled, running the blue ribbon through her fingers. "I kept it all these years. Even when I thought you weren't coming back, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away." Blake crossed the room, sitting beside her on the bed. "There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't think of you, Maddie. Even when things were at their worst, the thought of coming back to you kept me going. "Tell me," she said, leaning against him. "Tell me about those years, the good and the bad," and so he did. He told her about the cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, the blistering heat and sudden storms, the nights under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He spoke of the gold fields in California, where he'd made the bulk of his fortune not from striking gold himself, but from providing supplies to the miners who flooded the area. He described the battles with harsh winters, hostile elements, and occasionally hostile men. "And this?" she asked, tracing the scar along his jawline that had caught her attention that first day. His expression darkened slightly. "That was from a disagreement with a man who thought I'd cheated him at cards. I hadn't, but he was drunk and looking for a fight. He pulled a knife and I was lucky it wasn't worse." She pressed a gentle kiss to the scar. "I'm glad you came back to me in one piece." "Mostly in one piece," he corrected with a grin, showing her a smaller scar on his hand. "But every hardship was worth it to get back to you." The day of their departure dawned clear and bright, the September sun warming the earth as they loaded the last of their belongings into wagons. Thomas Cooper stood on the porch, surveying the land that had been his life's work with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. Madeline joined him, slipping her arm through his. "Are you sure about this, Father?" He patted her hand, his eyes still on the distant mountains. "I'm sure, Maddie. Your mother always said life was about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. It's time for me to let go of this place and hold on to what matters most, family." Blake approached, leading a horse for Thomas. "Everything's ready when you are, sir." Thomas Cooper nodded, squaring his shoulders as he descended the porch steps. "Then let's not waste daylight. Wyoming's a long way from here." As they set off, Madeline looked back at the only home she'd ever known, a sense of bittersweetness washing over her. But when she turned to Blake, riding tall and proud beside her, she knew without a doubt that she was heading toward her true home wherever he was. The journey to Wyoming was long but not without its pleasures. They traveled at a leisurely pace, mindful of Thomas Cooper's health, stopping in towns along the way where Blake was greeted with warm recognition by people he'd met during his travels. Madeline watched with pride as her husband navigated these encounters with easy charm, always introducing her as "my wife, Madeline," the words carrying a weight of accomplishment and joy. By the time they crested the final hill overlooking the Big Horn Basin, autumn had painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber. Madeline gasped at the view spread before her, rolling grasslands stretching toward distant mountains, a ribbon of silver river winding through the valley, and there, nestled against a stand of cottonwoods, a sturdy cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yancy," Blake said softly, his eyes reflecting her wonder and excitement. As they approached, a figure emerged from the cabin, a middle-aged woman who waved enthusiastically. "That's Mrs. Gentry," Blake explained. "She's been looking after the place while I was gone. Lives about a mile down the road with her husband." Mrs. Gentry greeted them warmly, ushering them into the cabin where a hot meal awaited. The interior was simple but well-crafted, with large windows that flooded the main room with light, sturdy furniture built by hand, and small touches, a bookshelf filled with volumes, a rocking chair by the fire, wildflowers in a jar on the table that told Madeline Blake had been thinking of her comfort all along. "It's not fancy," he said, watching her reaction nervously, "but we can make it whatever you want it to be." She turned to him, her heart too full for words, and simply wrapped her arms around his neck, pouring all her love and gratitude into a kiss that left them both breathless. Thomas Cooper cleared his throat awkwardly, reminding them they weren't alone. "I think I'll go check on the horses," he muttered, making a hasty retreat. Mrs. Gentry chuckled, following him out. "I'll just be heading home then. Left some stew on the stove and bread in the box." "Welcome to Wyoming, Mrs. Yancy." When they were alone, Blake led Madeline through the cabin, showing her each room with pride and occasionally a touch of apology for its simplicity. But to Madeline, who had spent years living in a house filled with memories of loss and financial worry, The cabin represented freedom and possibility. "It's perfect, Blake," she assured him, standing in the bedroom with its large bed covered in a colorful quilt. "It's everything I could have wanted." He pulled her close, his voice husky with emotion. "I built this place dreaming of you in every room. Sometimes I thought I was a fool, that you'd have married someone else by the time I returned, but I couldn't stop hoping." "And I couldn't stop waiting," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "Even when I tried to convince myself you weren't coming back, my heart refused to believe it." That night, after Thomas Cooper had been settled in the small bedroom off the kitchen, and the lamps turned down low, Blake and Madeline stood on the porch of their new home, watching as stars appeared one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. "Happy?" Blake asked, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, turning in his embrace to face him. "When I hid behind that curtain on my wedding day, I was trying to delay the inevitable. I never imagined you would be the one to pull it back." "I think I've been trying to get back to that moment for 5 years," he confessed, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "The moment before I left, when I should have stayed and fought for us. You're here now," she said simply, "and so am I, and we have the rest of our lives ahead of us." As the moon rose over their new home, casting silver light across the land that would sustain them and the children they would someday have, Blake Yancy kissed his wife once more, sealing a promise that had begun behind a curtain on a day meant for another man's wedding, and would continue for all the days they had been granted together. In the years that followed, the Yancy Ranch flourished, becoming one of the most respected in the territory. Thomas Cooper lived 5 more years, long enough to bounce his first grandchild, a girl they named Elizabeth after Madeline's mother, on his knee, and see the beginning of a legacy that would continue for generations. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the children asleep, Blake and Madeline would often sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors no artist could capture. Their hands entwined just as their lives had become separate threads woven together to create something stronger and more beautiful than either could have achieved alone.